47.2 The importance of biodiversity to human life. By the end of this section, you will be able to do the following. Identify chemical diversity benefits to humans. Identify biodiversity components that support human agriculture. Describe ecosystem services. It may not be clear why biologists are concerned about biodiversity loss. When biodiversity loss is thought of as the extinction of the passenger pigeon, the dodo bird, and even the woolly mammoth, the loss may appear to be an emotional one. But is the loss practically important for the welfare of the human species? From the perspective of evolution and ecology, the loss of a particular individual species is unimportant. However, we should note that the loss of a keystone species can lead to ecological disaster. Extinction is a normal part of macroevolution. But the accelerated extinction rate translates into the loss of tens of thousands of species within our lifetimes, and it is likely to have dramatic effects on human welfare through the collapse of ecosystems and in added costs to maintain food production, clean air and water, and human health. Agriculture began after early hunter-gatherer societies first settled in one place and heavily modified their immediate environment. This cultural transition has made it difficult for humans to recognize their dependence on undomesticated living things on the planet. Biologists recognize the human species as embedded in ecosystems and as dependent on them, just as every other species on the planet is dependent. Technology smooths out the extremes of existence, but ultimately the human species cannot exist without a supportive ecosystem. Human health archaeological evidence indicates that humans have been using plants for medicinal uses for thousands of years. A Chinese document from approximately 2800 BC is believed to be the first written account of herbal remedies, and such references occur throughout the global historical record. Contemporary indigenous societies that live close to the land often retain broad knowledge of the medicinal uses of plants growing in their area. Most plants produce secondary plant compounds, which are toxins used to protect the plant from insects and other animals that eat them, but some of which also work as medication. Modern pharmaceutical science also recognizes the importance of these plant compounds. Examples of significant medicines: 1382 Chapter 47, Conservation Biology and Biodiversity, access for free at openstax.org. Derived from plant compounds include aspirin, codeine, digoxin, atropine, and vincristine, figure 47.8. Many medicines were once derived from plant extracts but are now synthesized. It is estimated that, at one time, 25% of modern drugs contained at least one plant extract. That number has probably decreased to about 10% as natural plant ingredients are replaced by synthetic versions. Antibiotics, which are responsible for extraordinary improvements in health and lifespans in developed countries, are compounds largely derived from fungi and bacteria. Figure 47.8 Catharanthus roseus, the Madagascar periwinkle, has various medicinal properties. Among other uses, it is a source of vincristine, a drug used in the treatment of lymphomas. Credit: Forrest and Kim Starr. In recent years, animal venoms and poisons have excited intense research for their medicinal potential. By 2007, the FDA had approved 5 drugs based on animal toxins to treat diseases such as hypertension, chronic pain, and diabetes. Another 5 drugs are undergoing clinical trials, and at least 6 drugs are being used in other countries. Other toxins under investigation come from mammals, snakes, lizards, various amphibians, fish, snails, octopuses, and scorpions. Aside from representing billions of dollars in profits, these medicines improve people's lives. Pharmaceutical companies are always looking for new compounds synthesized by living organisms that can function as medicines. It is estimated that 1/3 of pharmaceutical research and development is spent on natural compounds and that about 35% of new drugs brought to market between 1981 and 2002 were derived from natural compounds. The opportunities for new medications will be reduced in direct proportion to the disappearance of species. Agricultural diversity. Since the beginning of human agriculture more than 10,000 years ago, human groups have been breeding and selecting crop varieties. This crop diversity matched the cultural diversity of highly subdivided populations of humans. For example, potatoes were domesticated beginning around 7,000 years ago in the central Andes of Peru and Bolivia. The potatoes grown in that region belong to 7 species, and the number of varieties likely is in the thousands. Even the Inca capital of Machu Picchu had numerous gardens growing varieties of potatoes. Each variety has been bred to thrive at particular elevations and soil and climate conditions. The diversity is driven by the diverse demands of the topography, the limited movement of people, and the demands created by crop rotation for different varieties that will do well in different fields. Potatoes are only one example of human-generated diversity. Every plant, animal, and fungus that has been cultivated by humans has been bred from original wild ancestor species into diverse varieties arising from the demands for food value, adaptation to growing conditions, and resistance to pests. The potato also demonstrates risks of low crop diversity. The tragic Irish potato famine occurred when the single variety grown in Ireland became susceptible to a potato blight, wiping out the entire crop. The loss of the potato crop led to mass famine and the related deaths of over 1 million people, as well as mass emigration of nearly 2 million people. Disease resistance is a chief benefit of crop biodiversity, and lack of diversity in contemporary crop species carries similar risks. Seed companies, which are the source of most crop varieties in developed countries, must continually breed new varieties to keep up with evolving pest organisms. These same seed companies, however, have participated in the decline of the number of varieties available as they focus on selling fewer varieties in more areas of the world. The ability to create new crop varieties relies on the diversity of varieties available and the accessibility of wild forms related to 47.2. The importance of biodiversity to human life 1383 The crop plant. These wild forms are often the source of new gene variants that can be bred with existing varieties to create varieties with new attributes. Loss of wild species related to a crop will mean the loss of potential in crop improvement. Maintaining the genetic diversity of wild species related to domesticated species ensures our continued food supply. Since the 1920s, government agriculture departments have maintained seed banks of crop varieties as a way of maintaining crop diversity. This system has flaws because, over time, seed banks are lost through accidents, and there is no way to replace them. In 2008, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, Figure 47.9, began storing seeds from around the world as a backup system to the regional seed banks. If a regional seed bank stores varieties in Svalbard, losses can be replaced from Svalbard. Conditions within the vault are maintained at ideal temperature and humidity for seed survival, but the deep underground location of the vault in the Arctic means that failure of the vault systems will not compromise the climatic conditions inside the vault. Visual connection Figure 47.9 The Svalbard Global Seed Vault is a storage facility for seeds of Earth's diverse crops. Credit: Mari Teffer, Svalbard Global Seed Vault. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault is located on Spitsbergen Island in Norway, which has an Arctic climate. Why might an Arctic climate be good for seed storage? Crop success is largely dependent on the quality of the soil. Although some agricultural soils are rendered sterile using controversial cultivation and chemical treatments, most contain a huge diversity of organisms that maintain nutrient cycles, breaking down organic matter into nutrient compounds that crops need for growth. These organisms also maintain soil texture that affects water and oxygen dynamics in the soil that are necessary for plant growth. If farmers had to maintain arable soil using alternate means, the cost of food would be much higher than it is now. These kinds of processes are called ecosystem services. They occur within ecosystems, such as soil ecosystems, as a result of the diverse metabolic activities of the organisms living there, but they provide benefits to human food production, drinking water availability, and breathable air. Plant pollination is another key ecosystem service, provided by various species of bees, other insects, and birds. One estimate indicates that honeybee pollination provides the United States a $1.6 billion annual benefit. Honey bee populations in North America have been suffering large losses caused by a syndrome known as colony collapse disorder, whose cause is unclear. Evidence suggests the possible culprits may be the invasive varroa mite coupled with the Nosema gut parasite and acute paralysis virus. Loss of these species would render it very difficult, if not impossible, to grow any of the 150 United States crops requiring pollination, including grapes, oranges, lemons, peppers, most brassica, broccoli and cauliflower, and many berries, melons, and nuts. Finally, humans compete for their food with crop pests, most of which are insects. Pesticides control these competitors. However, Pesticides are costly and lose their effectiveness over time as pest populations adapt and evolve. They also lead to collateral damage by killing non-pest species and risking the health of consumers and agricultural workers. Ecologists believe that the bulk of the work in removing pests is actually done by predators and parasites of those pests, but the impact has not been well studied. A review found that in 74% of studies that looked for an effect of landscape complexity on Natural 1384 Chapter 47, Conservation Biology and Biodiversity access for free at openstax.org. Enemies of pests: the greater the complexity, the greater the effect of pest-suppressing organisms. An experimental study found that introducing multiple enemies of P. aphids, an important alfalfa pest, increased the yield of alfalfa significantly. This study shows the importance of landscape diversity via the question of whether a diversity of pests is more effective at control than one single pest. The results showed this to be the case. Loss of diversity in pest enemies will inevitably make it more difficult and costly to grow food. Wild food sources: in addition to growing crops and raising animals for food, humans obtain food resources from wild populations, primarily fish populations. In fact, for approximately 1 billion people worldwide, aquatic resources provide the main source of animal protein. But since 1990, global fish production has declined, sometimes dramatically. Unfortunately, and despite considerable effort, few fisheries on the planet are managed for sustainability. Fishery extinctions rarely lead to complete extinction of the harvested species, but rather to a radical restructuring of the marine ecosystem in which a dominant species is so over-harvested that it becomes a minor player, ecologically. In addition to humans losing the food source, these alterations affect many other species in ways that are difficult or impossible to predict. The collapse of fisheries has dramatic and long-lasting effects on local populations that work in the fishery. In addition, the loss of an inexpensive protein source to populations that cannot afford to replace it will increase the cost of living and limit societies in other ways. In general, the fish taken from fisheries have shifted to smaller species as larger species are fished to extinction. The ultimate outcome could clearly be the loss of aquatic systems as food sources. Link to learning: view a brief video, http://openstax.org/l/declining_fish, discussing declining fish stocks. Psychological and moral value. Finally, it has been clearly shown that humans benefit psychologically from living in a biodiverse world. A chief proponent of this idea is Harvard entomologist E. O. Wilson. He argues that human evolutionary history has adapted us to live in a natural environment and that city environments generate psychological stressors that affect human health and well-being. There is considerable research into the psychological regenerative benefits of natural landscapes that suggests the hypothesis may hold some truth. In addition, there is a moral argument that humans have a responsibility to inflict as little harm as possible on other species.